Thanks, Diane. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Doug Curling. Doug is the retired president and COO and director of ChoicePoint. He served in those roles from May of 2000 until the company was sold to Reed Elsevier last September. At that point, Doug retired from the company. Doug has been with ChoicePoint in various financial roles since 1997. Prior to that, he held numerous financial and IT roles with RJR Nabisco and Equifax. I'll leave the details to ChoicePoint's business model for Doug to explain, other than to say, as an IT business, Doug was responsible for the day-to-day operations of the company, including all of ChoicePoint's technology, sales, customer service. He also oversaw the company's financial units. You've heard me mention Equifax before. ChoicePoint was a spin-off of the insurance services units of Equifax in 1997. Doug led the spin-off through the restructuring, the divestitures, and acquisitions. And through that transition, ChoicePoint was reshaped from a low-growth, low-margin, labor-intensive company to a high-growth, high-margin, technology-intensive business. The company's market cap grew from $540 million to $4.1 billion by 2008 when it was sold. Hasn't been all peaches and cream, and I think you get a sense of that from the title of Doug's speech, which I believe is Yes, Senator, and other phrases you don't learn in business school. Doug, you and I have a couple things in common. One is Blacksburg, Virginia, Virginia Tech. You were an undergraduate student in business there and still are active. I was on the faculty at Virginia Tech for close to 20 years. And the other, of course, is Athens, Georgia. Your son Michael is a graduate of our UGA program as well as Virginia Tech. Michael is one of 3 children that Doug and his wife Donna have. So we're looking forward to what you have to say. Doug, can I get you to come on up and tell us about ChoicePoint?
Good morning. This is a because of the way the room's laid out, I'm going to deviate a little bit from what I had planned to do, and I'm going to spend just a few minutes kind of giving you observations on 3 things, and then I'm going to try and have a lot more interactive dialogue with you. Sometimes I'm speaking in rooms that are laid out, you know, kind of rectangularly, and unless I wander the halls and go talk to the back, I can't really see what everybody's doing. But here, because of the intimacy of the setting, which is fabulous, by the way, I appreciate it very much, I'm going to try and just lay out some thoughts on a few things, and then maybe we can have a chat about how you feel about those or the kind of things you really have questions about. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a very informal person. One of my favorite things to do was at ChoicePoint was to have town hall meetings and play what we called Stump the Chump, where, you know, the leaders would get up front and the people and the associates could ask us questions about anything. And I really want to be able to offer you that same opportunity to do that today too. So I appreciate that very much. I want to thank the Terry College for having me here today. When the nice folks approached me, they asked me if I'd speak at this program. I asked them a few questions, including, you know, what do I have to speak about? And they said, well, you can speak about anything you want to, which is pretty much my sweet spot. So then they said, well, what do you want to call the program? And I gave them some suggestions. It started with things that were a little more left, and then they worked their way to more center. And they picked the one that I liked the best, which was the Yes, Senator, and other phrases you didn't learn in business school. I've been fortunate to have a very diverse business career, and even though it doesn't seem like that long to me, I have been working for over 30 years. So it's a lot longer when you look at it from this side than, you know, the way you feel about it in your head. And I've worked at a lot of different, very advanced technology companies, and I've had a lot of interesting experiences there. Not always great, positive, rewarding experiences, but certainly always developmental and highly entertaining and interesting experiences. So I want to try and give you some perspective on things that I think I've taken away from some of that over the 30 years that I've worked. Those of you that don't know a lot about ChoicePoint, I'll go through it quickly. The most important point on this slide is that the company was spun off from Equifax in 1997 with a market cap of $540 million. 11 years later, we sold the company for $4.1 billion. That's an incredible amount of value creation over slightly more than a decade. 2,000 of our 5,000 associates own stock in the company, so we created very, very, you know, large quantity of wealthy employees, as well as a large number of shareholders. The largest 3 or 4 shareholders were literally with us for the entire decade. So it was a fascinating financial story, and we're really proud of the results we were able to obtain. We had, as the dean mentioned, a very difficult business turnaround. The company started as a life insurance information company with 15,000 employees and 265 offices around America. And it ended up a very high technology company with the largest position in the P&C commercial and personal lines and commercial insurance market, where when you apply for an auto or a home policy, 100% of the automobile policies in the United States go through ChoicePoint's underwriting engines. About 70% of the homeowners policies in the U.S. go through ChoicePoint's underwriting engines. We created the largest pre-employment background screening company in the country out of something that was a very small, money-losing business at Equifax prior to us taking that over. And we created the largest public record business in the United States, selling public record information to groups as diverse as media, but also banking, finance, legal market, mergers and acquisitions, et cetera. So we really took something that was a business that was highly labor intensive, focused on one market, and turned it into a very technology intensive business focused on a wide variety of markets. And as we did that, obviously margins grew, revenue growth opportunities emerged, and we're really able to create a compelling story, which we're happy, had a very happy, although surprising, the way it went about ending. We got to experience as leaders a public company spinoff, an initial New York Stock Exchange listing. Even though we acquired shareholders at the time we spun the company off, we had to go retool those because they were shareholders of Equifax and they weren't necessarily interested in the ChoicePoint story. We did about 60 acquisitions and about 10 divestitures, so there were 70 M&A transactions during that 11-year period, from as small as about $13 million to as big as about $500 million. So the people at ChoicePoint had a lot of experience in deals and the way deals structured, et cetera. We also, from a variety of organizations over the 11-year life, were 4 times Georgia Company of the Year. So there were a whole lot of great things going on there, and we were really it's a very exciting place. We had no org charts. We had no committees. The only rule was really you had to have good motives. And there was a complete open door policy. I would get as would Derek, the chairman, get phone calls and emails from employees every day from issues as complicated as where we were going from a growth strategy to the toilets at the Breckenridge call center are backed up. Will you please come do something about that? And we had a lot of fun. We had, I remember when we were right before the deal closed, one of the best things we ever did was we had an inside the building putt-putt tournament where each department got to make their own golf hole, and we had holes that went down hallways, and the insurance people were going crazy. And it was really a very entrepreneurial kind of business, and we're really proud of that. That said, as you guys all know, progress isn't linear. And things don't always go, in a straight line up and down. I'm going to kick the can if that's okay with you guys. And so we also had, some of the things that almost every business today of any size or any visibility or any kind of expansion is going to experience, which would be, we had, because of some of the businesses we were going in, we experienced a lot of media and privacy backlash. There were a whole bunch of groups that didn't like various aspects of what our business model was being built around. There's a bunch of privacy organizations that don't like pre-employment background checks, and they don't like you being able to go in and look at the background of an employee. That's particularly true in certain market segments. Academia is one, where there's a push from some parent organizations to have teachers' background screened. Yet there's pushes back in elementary and middle schools from the teacher organizations going, we'll screen our employees. We don't want outside people doing that. The privacy folks didn't like the fact that we aggregated and sold public record data to law enforcement. And that's a big deal. A lot of us, I like when somebody breaks in my house, I like the police in my driveway. When they, are in my rearview mirror because I'm driving too fast, which I have a tendency to do, I like them a lot less. So, that's one of the things that we experienced a lot of, we had to do a lot of negotiation with, and I did a lot of that personally with the media and privacy folks, and it wasn't always fun, but it was interesting because there are people that are very intelligent people, but they have a totally alien perspective from the perspective you have, and trying to find common ground is something that the executives of today have to spend a lot of time doing. Like everybody else, we had a lot of activist and hostile shareholders. As your stock would go up and down, your shareholder pool would turn over a little bit, and you would see people come in your stock that solely wanted you to get a quick buck for them. And you had to know how to Heisman those people off or how to negotiate with the terrorists and try and get those people to go somewhere else so they didn't drive you crazy while you were trying to build your company. We had, as a lot of public companies do, inquiries from the SEC. about our financial reporting, about stock trades of executives, about the way we went about reporting some of the business combinations we did, about the kind of accounting results we might have. We never had any penalties from that, but we got a lot of investigations. We also had investigations out of the fraudulent data access with the Federal Trade Commission and the state attorneys general. So we got a lot of time with our buddies in DC, which is my team now, but at the time it wasn't my team. But you know, on trying to understand more about what we do and how we operate. We had Senate and House hearings. I got to testify twice before the Senate, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But your goal in that is to get from the, you know, yes senator to the yes senator on your cell phone mode. So you want to try and make that migration over. Now they call me and we have breakfast when they come to town. That wasn't what we were doing initially. And like a lot of big companies, we had class action litigation. And corporate America today, I don't know how many attorneys we have in the room, but you know, plaintiffs' lawyers are just a cost of doing business today. You will be sued. You know, you don't have to be right to be sued, and they're very tedious and time-consuming. And so we had, you know, half a dozen or so big class action litigations that we had to either beat down or navigate through. I think that's common for a lot of big companies, but it's one of those things that, as a leader, it's a big energy sink, and you don't like to spend a lot of time on it. But that said, what I want to do is from that, I want to give you a little bit of perspective on three things. And my slide guy is a guy that I've used for about 10 years. And I asked him about these slides, and I couldn't get him to say old dog, new dog, but I think what he was thinking about was old dog, new dog. So I decided in Joe's deference, those of you that work for me at ChoicePoint know who Joe is, but at Joe's deference, I left the slides this way. But I'm going to spend I got about 15 minutes or so of observations on three topics. What I've seen change, particularly in the arena of technology in the last 30 years, what I've personally learned, and then two or three things I think you guys can expect next. As a retired guy at the moment, I'm not that worried about expecting next. So let's first talk about, you know, what I've seen change. Four topics. We'll go through each of them. First, on information. When you know, 30 years ago when I began work, information was highly structured, it was difficult to acquire, and it was very expensive and time-consuming to obtain. We've moved over those 30 years to a time where information's really completely unstructured, practically everywhere, and almost free. An amazing transformation over my business career. The first web server went live about 20 years ago, and today we have over 3 million pages being added to the web every single day. So if you think about what's gone on in my lifetime of data and information, the issue for my generation was information access. The issue for the generation of business folks today, which I assume most of you are actively engaged in business, is really going to be the assimilation of all that information, which is why you hear so much talk today about analytics and the importance of being able to analyze that data. Used to be you had, you know, it was find somebody to go get that. Now it's I'm overwhelmed with all this. Someone please make sense of all that. With respect to communication, you know, 30 years ago, communication was very episodic or periodic. It was largely face-to-face, and it was almost always one way. Somebody talked to you, you talk back to them. Now, you know, if you think about what's going on in our country, in something like 1982 or 1983, the FCC authorized the first cell service in America. Not that long ago, really, you know? You think about that now, there's 2 billion cell phones in this world. So that's about a third of the humans on this planet are using a cell phone. About 2/3 of America has a cell phone, is using a cell phone, and about half of us are using email every single day. I'm completely addicted to my BlackBerry, although they won't let you have it on the stage. But you know, I travel all over the world, and I can get an email from almost any of you in 30 seconds anywhere I go. But that's fading away. If you talk to what, you know, those of you that have 20-somethings, which I have a house full of, they don't really use email, they use instant messaging. Because 30 seconds is too long. An email is too dense. You know, we've got to get that thing, we got to get that message out quicker, and we got to make it crisper. So, you know, nowadays, when you've got continuous communication, it's all digital, almost none of it's face-to-face. Reed Elsevier in particular, the company that bought ChoicePoint, is very big on web conferencing and teleconferencing, and they have very few face-to-face meetings. And it's all multi-threaded. There's very little I'm talking, you're talking. You know, now even if you turn on the TV, which I try not to do a whole lot, but you try and watch one of those talk shows, and there's like 8 people talking at the same time. You're going, wow, I can't function. So, and when I was starting my business career, what you tried to do was gen up dialogue. You wanted some communication to take place. Now we're in communication overload. and you've got to figure out how to sort through all that communication or shut down some of that communication so you have more time to kind of think and focus about what's really going on. Similar to information and communication, cycle times have really just gone wacko. You know, early in my career, I remember someone talking about trying to get somebody to play the role of something called a change agent. Those of you that are of my age group will understand that phrase, change agent. You know, you'd have meetings and you'd sit around and talk about, we need to make something happen. We got to find a change agent. We'll get somebody in here that's going to really stir things up or make things different. Now you just got to, you know, you're trying to find somebody to stabilize things. It's just constantly changing. And, you know, I need something. Let's let that alone. Let's leave that be for a little while and we'll go focus some area over here. It's completely opposite to where I started work. I read something, an author once said that it's becoming, as this guy said, a ceaseless spectacle of transition. And I think that's a great phrase. It's constantly changing. Status quo is no longer something you have. It's something you got to try and find a way to achieve. Change takes place very rapidly. It's almost impossible to stop. So I think that this, you know, generation of business leaders is, again, going to have to figure out how to accept that as kind of the norm and be able to take this continually changing world and continually changing business model and somehow provide continuity to it. You know, that the half-life of a business now or a business plan is very short. I mean, you start out to go build a business and you're kind of going to go capture revenue this way. And within 5 or 6 years, you've got to make a pretty radical change to that or you're going to plateau out. You know, the ability to be GE or Ford or somebody that, you know, had a 100-year kind of run just isn't going to happen. And we're going to have to find a way to cope with that. Last observations on governance. When my business career started, what you really wanted was to surround yourself with people that could really help you challenge your business strategy. People that could sit down and talk to you about, you know, how you run the enterprise and try and make sure that, you know, you were running as fast as you could run and that you were being aggressive enough. And it was easy to get board members to go do that because they were excited about being in, you know, they probably had stable jobs or had long careers and they wanted to come be involved in something that was highly volatile and highly energetic. That's not what governance is about today. Governance today is about covering your ass. It's about trying to make sure you don't take too much risk. It's about trying to make sure we've thought about all the things that could go wrong. It's about trying to make sure that the risk management of the company has been put in place appropriately so we don't jeopardize the balance sheet and we don't expose ourselves to unnecessary litigation. And I'm not saying that a risk model isn't important, but you've lost something in the translation from those two things. It's very hard now to get quality board members to come work for you. They're worried about their own personal liability. They're worried about whether or not the D&O policies are going to truly protect them should the corporation be under assault, and they just don't need the grief. So there's a whole lot of seasoned business people that are going, I just don't really want to be on a public company board. You know, I'd rather go work with a private company or I'd rather go consult with entrepreneurs. I don't need the headache for, you know, what's really reasonable compensation. I was approached for a board job not long ago, and the comp for 1 year for about 19 days a year was 160 grand. I don't need the grief, guys. I just don't want to put myself in that kind of jeopardy. So I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think risk management is very important. And I do think that, you know, fast-paced things tend to hit the guardrails more than drive down the middle line. So kind of like you're seeing in our economy, you have a boom, you have a bust. I think the governance model goes from go to slow, but the governance model's changed a lot during my business career, and I think it's something we all have to be cognizant about because you're losing a lot of what you used to have as a young business person in the sage advice of older, wiser people that could really help you challenge yourself and be all that you could be. It's a lot easier to try and tell you to slow down and don't take that risk and don't really throw yourself into that. Second group, and this is really the, you know, if you get anything out of today's talk, try and find something in one of these things that you go, yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm going to think about that in my own career. This is really just some quick observations on things I've learned. First, about people. It's really important not to confuse people that are good with people that are talented. And it's hard to do. I mean, if you're a compassionate human being, you work with people a long time, there are people that have helped you get where you got today that are really, really good people. But they may not have the talent you need to get you to the next level. And you have to make tough calls about that. And I think you got to, you know, as a leader, you have to try and find ways to every day be honest with people about the value and what they're doing so that you don't surprise them, you know, as you reach that moment where you go, I need to look a different direction. I need to get a different talent in. I think it's real important in trying to deal with people to try and separate out whether they want to feel important or they want to be important. People that want to feel important are people that you got to try and manage the ego of. People that want to be important are people that you got to give more work to. One of the reasons I don't like org charts is I think it helps people that want to feel important feel important. You know, look at where I am on the org chart compared to you. And I just don't like that. And so we just, we used to fine people for if you produced an org chart, $1 if you, produced one, $2 if you handed it out, $5 if you put it on a document and published it anywhere. And it wasn't because they're not important to, it's not important for you to know who your boss is or who you work for, but it's just that notion of what you really want is to try and instill in everybody that you're important. What you do is important to my corporation. What you do is important to your teammates. And it isn't really about whether you feel important or whether you have a big office or a big desk or a big title. It's about us trying to make sure you know you're important to us as an organization. Third, leaders get a lot in their head about their responsibilities to make sure everybody feels like they're part of the team. But the honest to God truth is you have very little impact on the day-to-day company as a leader. You can set the cultural tone and you can set, the way the rules of behavior are going to be laid out. But at the end of the day, the way people feel about their jobs and their company is all about the person that sits to their left and their right and how they made them feel today. And, if they had a tough call and they did a good job of handling it, if the person next door said, you did a great job with that tough call, or congratulations, or I know you're having a tough time with your daughter, why don't you knock off a little early and I'll cover for you. That's what creates retention. That's what creates loyalty in a corporation. And until you can get your employees to communicate with each other and feel like they're part of a peer group, whatever you do as a leader really isn't going to matter at the end of the day to retention. You can buy them temporarily. You can give them retention plans that'll go, okay, I'm financially motivated to stay here. But what they walk out with every day is all about the people they sit next to, not about the people they sit below on the chart. Lastly, even when things aren't going well, people want to feel included, they want to feel valued, and they want to be respected. If you have a dialogue with them and let them be included, and you say, I appreciate your view, even if you totally ignore it and go a completely different direction, they will still support you because you took the time to listen to them and you made them feel like you cared about what they were saying. What I've learned about business. The first line says it all. I won't comment on that. It's personal. You put a lot into the company that you run, and it isn't just something you can go, well, it's 5 o'clock, I'm going home now. You can have a conversation with somebody that's not personal, about their performance, but you can't have a conversation about a business that's not personal. And so when people would say to me, we'd have a difficult, negotiation going on, somebody would go, well, it's not personal, it's just business. You go, it is personal. I have a lot more tied up in this than just, my paycheck. And so I just don't like that phrase, and I don't think it reflects reality in the business world today. I learned, this is one of mine, and I learned this one. I learned this one in an early business negotiation where I was very tempted to try and go after a competitor that was doing something that I didn't like. But we thought about it, and I thought at the end of the day, I thought they'd fail because what they were doing didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And we restrained ourselves, which is hard to do sometimes. You are competitive, and you want to go make things happen. But I learned that if your competitors are doing stupid things and you like what they're doing, don't talk to them. Don't tell them anything. Don't gloat. Don't bang your chest. Don't interrupt them. Just let them continue to do what they've been doing. Third, I don't think you can grow revenue and cut costs at the same time. So when people want to, if you're in an environment where you want to grow revenue, grow revenue. If you're in an environment where you got to cut costs, go cut costs. But don't try and do both at the same time. You simply can't make it happen. It's not possible in my view. And any company that tries to do that, and I've seen, you see announcements sometimes from corporations that go, we're making some difficult cost cuts, but we're still focused on revenue growth, and we're going to go do, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, they're two completely different, equally necessary functions, but you can't do them both at the same time. Last but not least, I don't think great companies get great when times are easy. I think they get great when times are tough. So if you can survive a difficult downturn and continue to make your company stronger at its core while you're doing that, you will emerge a very powerful enterprise. And so you don't lose hope when times get crappy. You get energized when times get crappy, and you go, this is when we're really going to make our business great. We're going to make the tough decisions about what to cut and run from. We're going to make the tough decisions about things we've been putting off, but we need to go get after right now. We're going to make the tough decisions about where to make investments in things that, probably wouldn't necessarily think we can spend the money on, but we really think it's going to make us a much better company longer term. You will be great when times are tough. You will coast when times are easy because that's just what humans do. So your company is going to mirror you there. My favorite group, elected officials and regulators. It isn't that they're bad people. It isn't that they're after you. It's that they don't understand what you're doing and they have a different job. You have to understand that they get to make the rules. You have to play by their rules. And you should work very, very hard to be non-confrontational and to get out of there as quickly as you can. 5 quick points. It does help to build relationships in advance of a problem. And while in an elected official world, relationships can be about making sure they understand what your company does and what your business does, at the end of the day, the most distasteful, difficult thing a politician does is raise money. If you're a U.S. House of Representatives member, you have to have a campaign every 2 years. Even in a very isolated district, you have to raise $1.5 million. That's a lot of money for you and a lot of cycle time in every 2-year cycle. If you're a senator, you're probably raising $10 to $15 million to go run every 6 years. They need cash just to make the machine work. So you can spend a lot of time talking to politicians, and giving them money does not get you favors. I will assure you of that. Okay, because I probably was one of the biggest givers to John Kerry, and in the Senate hearing I was in, he was the most lost, most confused, most abusive, questioner of me at one of the hearings that I had. But you got to understand that that's what they hate doing, and that's what they have to do to stay in office. So you need to try and find a way to pay attention to the committees that matter to you, and you should get involved in them with advance of your problems. And it's very easy. Just go, hire people that understand what you need and go to the right kind of settings. It doesn't get you any favors. Doesn't, they may remember who you are. I don't know that, but it is important for you when you want to go talk to them in advance of your hearing. You can go meet with them the day before your hearing is scheduled and talk to that senator or congressman one-on-one so that you don't walk into a cold hearing the next day having not had a chance to do a little warm-up with them and help them understand your view, and it humanizes it some. Hire experts. We hired experts. I had breakfast yesterday with a gentleman named Dan McGinn. Dan McGinn runs the greatest crisis communication company in America. And if you ever have a major FUBAR, you will call on McGinn Associates to help straighten you out. He is working with 2 very large corporations today, both of which, one has 2 initials, one has 3 initials. You know exactly who they are. And it's just fascinating that people continue to make mistakes. And you're going to make mistakes because you're running fast, and your PR or the messages you send out or the business decisions you make. His team helps you clean that up. You need to hire experts. You don't want to learn while you're going. Choose your battles carefully, know when to settle. It's expensive to fight. Nobody likes to settle class action litigation, regulatory settlements, etc. But time is your most precious resource. Money is not. You will make more money. You will not make more time. So when you look at something that goes, I'm going to drag this out for 2 years, and it's going to eat 20% of 3 managers' attention span, settle the litigation for some monetary amount, put it behind you, and move on. Try to manage the scope and timing. You can change in a regulatory or elected congressional setting what they talk about, how long they talk about it, and where you are in the pecking order. One of the simple tips they arranged for me was never sit on either end of a hearing table, because the guys on either end get all the questions. At a Senate hearing, they only have 5 minutes to ask you questions, so use the filibuster rule. Don't be in a hurry to talk. I can talk really slow when I need to try and eat the clock for 5 minutes. And then the obvious, be respectful, be helpful, be direct. About the media. I know we have some media here. Everybody has a different job, and the media's job is to try and provide information to whatever their reader group happens to be. And that reader group probably isn't that educated about your business. They're probably not that interested in your business, and they're probably not going to spend a whole lot of time reading the article that the reporter spent an incredible amount of time trying to put together. I didn't give a lot of media interviews because I just felt like it wasn't something that was going to benefit me personally. I would talk about my BlackBerry use or the Braves or fishing in Destin, but I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the business to the media. But I have some observations. When you're talking to the media, think like the media wants to break a big story. So if they may not, but you need to think about as an executive that they're going to want to try and break a big story. If you could give them the big story to break, what would it be? because they're just trying to go, what story is inside this interview you're having here? I don't know. They don't have any bias about whether it's good or bad. Second, it's easy for anybody to pick on somebody they don't know, so make it personal. Have a personal relationship with the people that cover your company. Take them to Braves games. Buy them lunch. Talk to them about their children. Trade fishing lures if that's what, you like fishing. But try and do something to humanize it. Because, we as humans deal with one another individually a lot different than we do when we talk about that thing. It's totally different. Avoid making statements about things you don't fully understand. You will end up eating those every single time. If you don't know, say, I don't know. Lower your expectations. Settle for a story that does no harm. You're excited about your business. You're passionate about your business. You think there's 27 great things that reporter could write about. They only wrote about 2. Why didn't that reporter write those other 25 things? Because it didn't seem all that exciting to them, and it probably won't seem all that exciting to their readers. So you in your head are going, wow, that's not a really good story. On the other hand, it didn't do you any harm, so it's a good story. Just lower your expectations about that. Last and most important about myself. My wife taught me this first one when I had kids that were not in their 20s, but were instead in their teens. And I would tell particularly young Michael, who was the Georgia grad, something that I wanted him to do, and I would get, back, but he ultimately would go do it. And I didn't like this, and so, I would, engage with him about the way he interacted with his pop. And my wife one day pulled me aside and said, he's doing what you want him to do. Why do you care what he says back to you? She said, do you want to feel better or do you want to get what you want? And that was really a very insightful statement, because there's lots of times in business you feel like you just need to go something. But the truth is, it may not help you get what you want, so hold yourself back. And restraining yourself is really hard. I organized around my strengths. I'm a morning person. I hate afternoons. I'm a written person. I hate listening. I had ADD long before it was fashionable. So people talk at this speed and I read at this speed. So I don't like people stampeding my calendar. So I would block off in my calendar half the week and not let anybody meet with me in those half unless I called them. So that people didn't just manage, So it's a skill I learned early in my business career, by the way. If you've got somebody that's a supervisor and they're difficult, just stampede their calendar. Set up all kinds of meetings on their calendar for other stuff and other people and all kinds of progress updates. And so they can't ever proact on you. They're always on the defense. So do that. The next 2, everybody is watching you. You're the leader of the enterprise. They are paying attention to you. They're paying attention to what you do. And you need to think that in every setting there is somebody there that's going to watch what you did and go tell somebody else about it. So just always be mindful that you're on the stage. There are no little people. You'd be surprised how many times. I remember interviewing a guy one time, and I asked, as I was walking him out, we had a guard desk at the front of the building. I saw the person that signed everybody in kind of scowling at this interview candidate I walked out. So I asked the guy about the guy. He goes, that guy was a real jerk. Well, I don't think that guy left knowing that what mattered most in his, interview process was what the front desk guard said about him. But the truth is, the front desk guard blew him off. And I was done with him at that point. I do not want you to, if you're going to be rough with, the front desk person, you're not going to be behave well with the rest of my employees. Last, try, do it or not. This is a Yoda quote. There is no try. If you don't want to do it, don't bother. If you want to do it, do it. If you set out to take Rome, take Rome. If it bothers you that you don't have Rome, but you really don't want to put the energy into taking it over, don't bother with it. Let it go. Just find a way to emotionally write it off and be done with it. Last but not least, 3 quick observations. 1, we talked about instant messaging. Attention spans are getting very, very short. Yet the memory of the event is getting longer because of the internet and the ability to keep that out there forever. That to me is an interesting kind of dichotomy. It will be over in the news cycle in 38 seconds. But every other story about you for the next X is going to bring that same thing back up because it's easy to find that history out there. So you need to think about managing any kind of problem or any kind of good story 2 different ways. 1, if it's really ugly, it's going to pass. Don't put a 90-day campaign on something that's going to be over with in a day and a half. On the other hand, start planning the markers to make it look different in historical perspective than it does this minute on the headlines of the news, because it will be out there for 5 or 10 years. And I think you folks are really going to have to think about the good news, bad news side of that and what it means to you. In my opinion, secondly, there is an incredible growth in what I would call spectators and reporters instead of players. Everybody wants to vote on how you run your company. They want to give you commentary on whether you're doing a good job or a bad job. Shareholders want to talk about executive comp. Regulators want to talk about the way you manage your overseas corporations. Everybody wants to talk about whether you should outsource jobs, to India. I mean, this populace of people that used to just be your shareholders has now expanded to all these folks that want to, comment and opine on whether you're doing the right thing as a business leader or not. You can't allow them to distract you or drain your energy. And my rules worked in a hierarchical way. First, could I ignore them? If I could ignore them, I was done. They would just drone on and I would just ignore them. Secondly, can I distract them? Right? If they're after me to make some business change, but I really don't want to make it, I'll distract them with something else. Third, can they be controlled? And last, can they be convinced? It takes a lot of energy to convince somebody on the outside that you're doing the right thing inside your business. And you really don't want to spend a lot of time trying to educate and convince everybody to go about it your way. So if you can distract them or ignore them, I highly encourage you to do that. And I think this is something you're really going to have to deal with a lot more than I did, because it just seems to be everywhere. Everybody thinks they have a voice in the way you operate your company. And I just, it's not possible to run it that way. Last but not least, we are not having an operating crisis in America. We're not having a financial crisis in America. We're having a liquidity crisis in America. If you have cash, you are fine. If your business has cash, you're jamming. You can borrow money cheaper than you've ever been able to borrow it. Everybody will give you a discount on everything you're trying to buy. You can hire the best employees in America if you want to go hire them. It is a great time to have cash. If you don't have cash, you're screwed. So my last point is just a simple reminder of cash has been and always will be king. Never run out of cash. So those are my observations. Now it's my time. I judge the quality of the audience by the quality of their questions. So I'm just saying. What kind of questions do you have, or what do you want to talk about?
And let me just mention for anyone who doesn't come here regularly that we're doing a podcast of this. It's a big room. So for both of those reasons, before you start asking your question, get a microphone. We've got people with microphones around the room, over there and there. Thank you.
Memory will be long, yeah.
When it was really tough in front of Congress, what did you do to keep your spirits up so you could sit there and say, I have to come back and really get through this?
That's a good question. I actually, my spirits are usually pretty up. I manage problems by being prepared. As an there's a difference between being a strategy person and an ops person. The guy that I worked with as a partner the whole time I was at ChoicePoint was the chairman and CEO, Derek Smith. And I used to say he dealt with what if and I dealt with what is. When you deal with what is, you don't worry about trying to change your circumstances. You simply try and worry about navigating through them. And I prepared. We hired experts that literally do nothing but prepare executives for congressional testimony. They locked me in rooms with them for literally 3 days, and from the time I got up in the morning to the time I went to bed at night, they would be peppering me with questions. And we'd be in the middle of cutting a steak at dinner, talking about, baseball, and they would go, Mr. Curling, and they would shift modes and go back into inquiry mode. So I was comfortable with the setting by the time we did that. I also had a little piece of paper that was the size of a placekin at a cheap diner, the placemat you have, that had prepared little questions and answers on it. So if you was something you really wanted to stick to script on, you would just refer back to that to stick to script. And also, there's a little clock in front of you. When you're sitting at this room, I should set the stage. It looks different on TV than it really is. You're in a room, and you see all the people, the senators sitting up in the dais in front of you, and they're all lined up, and there's all these staffers behind them, and the TV cameras are on, and there's reporters in front of you, and you're at a little table, and you got microphones, and there's people beside you. After about the first 3 minutes, there's only 2 senators and 3 staffers left. And the camera angle tightens, and the person that's asking you questions for 5 minutes is the only one in the room, and at 4 minutes and 50 seconds, another senator and staffer comes back in. So it looks like they're all sitting there, but after the initial spectacle is over, it's really all about their 5 minutes of TV time that you can then turn into edits to send back to their folks. So it's not, once you see the theater of it, the intimidation factors, kind of goes away. There's a clock in front of you that counts down from 5 minutes. There's a red, a yellow, and a green light that shows you kind of how much time is left on that senator's questioning time. The hardest thing is really to avoid, you're in business, you're so used to trying to talk to people completely. Here, yes and no are great answers. Yes sir, no sir, I'll find out sir, I don't know. Also, it's very distracting because there's a lot of photographers in front of you with flashes. So you're usually not used to the paparazzi effect, and it is just, it drains your train of thought. But I didn't have a lot of trouble keeping my energy up. It was more just, I want to get this over with, right? Like a trip to the dentist or something, right? I got to do it, but let me just get it over with, and I'll go back and it'll be fine. Good question. Yes.
I found your comparison quite interesting that said how it was before focusing on the strategy of the business and how it is now just dealing with dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
Could you expand upon that a little bit?
Sure. I think there's two thoughts there. One is about governance and just the fact that now corporate America is very much about managing the risk model and not trying to manage the strategy of the company as much. Boards still spend time on strategy, but you spend a lot more time on the risk model because really where the big gotcha now isn't that I missed something strategically, it's I missed something from a risk model standpoint, and I can't afford to have that giant step backwards. From a operations perspective, as the company gets bigger and as you elevate yourself up, you don't run a whole lot. I mean, I was the chief operating officer of a very large, very sophisticated technology company. I didn't make the lights come on every day. I didn't make the employees come in every day. I didn't make the, salary review process and, payroll processing process and customer billing process work. You tend to get dragged into more eliminating dysfunction settings. So your specialty becomes, how can I try and take noise out of the system, as opposed to how can I really elevate or enhance the system. Your staff people who are very, very good at what they do, we had a model of I hire adults, I treat them like adults, I expect them to behave like adults. Those people, the highest reward you can give them is to leave them alone. I mean, a sophisticated manager in corporate America today doesn't want to be babysat, right? What they want to do is you want to agree on a plan, you want them to execute the plan, and if they're executing the plan, you leave them alone. If the plan isn't going so well, you become more friendly with them, and if it's really screwed up, they get a lot of your time. And that's where I think from a leadership standpoint, you tend to gravitate more to my job is to try and take friction out of the system so everybody else can do their job better, as opposed to making sure the coal gets shoveled and the wheels go round and round. Thank you. Yes, we got to get a microphone, I guess, for them.
Now, you are a fairly young man. Are you really retired?
I feel a lot younger in my head than I am by mileage. I stayed home. I'll tell you a true story. I stayed home the company closed. We closed the deal on September 19th. And I was going to stay home for some undetermined period of time and just see when I decided I want to go back and do something. And I, did like everybody else would do. You visited all your kids and visited your mom and cleaned up the house and finally got that garage emptied out and did all that. And I was sitting on my back porch. This is a true story. About 90 days later, and I'm reading a book in Atlanta in December. It's not always awful outside. So I'm outside reading a book on my back porch, and I hear this voice. I have a very long driveway, and I hear this voice walking down my driveway, and they're saying, Dougie, Dougie. And I'm going, nobody calls me Dougie. Even my good friends, Dave Tenery and others here, know they don't call me Dougie. So I go, who in the world is calling me Dougie? So I go to the front door, and it's George, the FedEx guy. Well, at that point, I said, I've been home too long. I had to go do something. So I hired a broker the next day to go buy me an office building. And I had that broker, and I live in a small town, Roswell, north of here, that's got a great historic district that's full of art galleries and restaurants and bars, et cetera. And I had him knock on doors on that street until he found me a building I could buy. I closed on the building at the end of January. I took possession at the end of February, and I now go to an office every day about 6:30. Trying to find, what I'm going to do next. And it's a little unusual to have an office before you have a business plan. But it's easy to watch the market open and watch SportsCenter, and you can waste a lot of time at home. And the thing I disliked most about not working was the lack of structure. I'm not a Marine, but it's just something about there's a schedule here So now I've got to schedule again, and I'm going to go do something. Yeah, I have about 6 or 8 meetings a week with people. I was comparing notes with a couple folks here. We're all running the same circuit to try and see who's got the greatest technology company, who's got a good idea, who's got. I'll go back and do something in the technology arena, but I'm going to take my time and find out exactly what the right thing is. So far, the only thing I've done is I have a friend that runs a big $5 million a year charity in Central America, and I went down there with him, and I'm helping him do some things from a management perspective with that charity. And I'm going to hire an intern to build a online company store for that group for their website. So that is costing me money, not making me money, but it's something to do.
Your observation of the senators doing their 5 minutes for the television back home was sort of fascinating view of the media. Going forward, how do you see the, if you will, the power of the visual media of polling affecting business and governance in Washington in particular going forward?
Yeah, I don't know. I've had a lot of conversations with my generation about that, and media is changing, as we all know, like a lot of things a lot. I mean, I can ask everybody in this room, how many of you have a landline at your house? How many of you wear a wristwatch? And how many of you read a newspaper? And we're going to get a fair show of hands here. I asked one of his classes or one of your classes at University of Georgia, nobody has a landline. Very few of them have watches because they use cell phones. And if they get the newspaper, it's only because they were told they had to get the Wall Street Journal, but they read it online. So, I don't know. I have trouble digesting dense things online. And it's not very green of me, but I do print them off. And I just don't know how an executive, if my kids, heaven forbid, enter the workforce. I hope I'm gone by the time they get there. But if they're actually in charge, it's going to be interesting what media really is at that point. I do think that the opinion side of media is extraordinarily valuable. And I think that people really do seek out a perspective from the media. And I think it's important for business leaders to engage with that perspective, because that different perspective is meaningful to me too. I mean, I have blinders on like everybody else does, and I need somebody to come challenge me to go, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way. That's interesting. When I was down in Nicaragua, I'll tell 2 little quick stories. One story, I'm at a dump. It's a 100-acre dump. There's fires everywhere. There's dogs running around. There's people roaming the dump, gathering metal and plastic and recycling. And, it's in the middle of nowhere of the poorest country in Central America. And I wandered out of the dump to the little adjacent, volunteer kind of village there. And I met this woman and her 2 daughters. And she recycles plastic bottles, one at a time, aggregates them in 100-pound sacks, sells them to a guy at the other end of the dump, and that's how she makes her money. She was getting $10 a 100-pound sack in August. She gets $2.50 now, a 100-pound sack. I don't need to read the Wall Street Journal to understand what's going on in the commodities market. I can go to a dump in Central America and kind of see what's going on. So the aha of that, I think, is that in the media side, I really don't know how media is going to end up. It's pretty obvious papers are under siege. And I know a lot of people. My wife went out immediately and bought me a Kindle, this new electronic Amazon reader, and I'm not sure. I mean, I feel a little like Kevin Costner in Waterworld when the guy brings in paper, and you're going, paper. I like paper. I feel a little the same way. I like paper. But it's pretty amazing that, if you think of the life you spent traveling through airports, buying books and lugging these paperbacks and getting 40 pages in it going, that isn't any good. I don't like that. And, now you can zap your book to your, wireless device in 10 seconds, and I'm off and reading it. And if I don't like it, I just zap another one down. I don't want to be in the media now. It's going to be tough. But you're going to have to figure out who the influencers are, and you're going to have to find a way to engage them as a business leader. And they may be bloggers. And in my privacy setting, a lot of the people that were most influential in the privacy arena are just absolute privacy patriots on one topic of privacy, and their voice is a website. And you just got to go find that human, just like you would find that reporter, and try and talk to them. Yes.
I was curious when you were talking about your son, and the email age nowadays is to have quick sound bites and get quick response. I look back and I think, I've been working for about 20-something years now, and I remember everything was done by telephone, and now everybody expects you to be at your desk. They think you're there answering your emails. They send long emails with 20 attachments, and we're all so busy. We're in meetings, and I was just curious, from a technology standpoint, what do you think is the next step for after email world? Do you think we'll get to a quicker, faster place? Because I think that it's assumed that you're sitting there responding all day long.
I think there's two things going on that, for me anyway, I'll just say what I'm interested in are two things. One, I think the social network thing is fascinating. That, there's a cult of us that like X, and we're going to go create a little social network of X, and we're going to talk about X amongst each other. And you can dive in and dive out whenever you want to. And so that's just, there's a lot of them out there. If you haven't been out there, one I'll suggest is go to a website called Ning, N-I-N-G. And it's just thousands of different groups and organizations and clubs and pet lovers and, people that are getting married and, new mothers and just these ad hoc groups. And they chat and talk about what they care about. That thing, which you can morph in and out of and be one person in that network and a different person in a different network, is a very thin slice of topical coverage. And I'm fascinated by that. The second thing is I'm fascinated by this Twitter, Facebook update. I'm just going to tell you what I'm up to, and you can read it or not read it. I mean, my life's pretty boring. I mean, I post a couple things out there every day. I did not post this morning. I was going to give a speech, but I mean, I just don't think people are all that interested in stopping to get gas. Gotta remember to buy more Jack Daniels. I don't know, but I mean, the kids seem very fascinated by it, and they know what each other are doing, even though they're all over the country, because of those little updates. And so I think somehow business is going to have to figure out how to incorporate that in there. And it might be that, I'm in charge of a project. I'll create a social network site for that project. I'll give everybody all my view of what's going on in the project. They'll all kind of come in and chime in their own time about what it really is. I'll assess that, pull it back, and use that as a tool to go, what am I really going to go do next? We always had a rule at ChoicePoint that, you could walk out of a meeting anytime you wanted to, but if you walked out, you lost your proxy. That's kind of what some of these are, right? If you want to participate, jump in and talk. Google has every meeting at Google's open. Anybody can sit in on any meeting they want to at Google anytime. So, and most of them are virtual, so you don't, the only way you know they're there is to look at the participant list on the web broadcast. Those kind of things, I think, are what, I would pay attention to as a business leader and see kind of how that might affect my business. But it is really interesting. I just can't read. I mean, I like my BlackBerry, but if it's more than this, if it doesn't fit the screen, it doesn't really get read, How are we doing time-wise?
Yeah, we got time for probably one more question.
Okay.
Doug, you mentioned, I guess, all of the information that comes at us, and a friend of mine said he wished he had a sophisticated firewall in his head that he could filter out the useless information and just keep the good stuff. What did you do at ChoicePoint to block out a lot of that nonsense that you said, or ignore it?
Well, the company had, just like every other company does, all kinds of filters and, whatever. I think I'll answer it on the human way. A trait you need to learn today, and it might be the most important trait for you as an individual, is to know what to say no to. Know what not to spend time on. Because in a world of unlimited requests and unlimited amount of information, really what you ignore is going to be probably a more important decision than what you pay attention to. Because by making good decisions about what you ignore, you'll free up cycle time to focus on the things that really matter. And so what I would, what I did when I was, in the business world, I paid a lot of attention to whether I really cared about it or not. And if I didn't care about it, I wouldn't let that happen. I wouldn't read the email. I wouldn't, and everybody that worked for me, and there's several people in here that work for me at ChoicePoint, know that send Doug the email. If he wants to read it, he will. If he doesn't want to read it, he won't. If he cares about it, he'll write back to you. Just keep moving. You got to know how to avoid getting stuck in things that at the end of the day are going to eat up your calendar and not let you get focused on what you really care about. And, if there's 300 emails a day, you might read, I probably read, back when I worked at ChoicePoint, I probably got 400 emails a day. I probably read about 40 of them. And sometimes you can go by the recipient. I don't care. Right? I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's just like, the sender, the person that sent that to you, is sending it for some reason other than to get your personal vote, because there's 3 levels of management between you and that person. So just look at who would send it to, look at the copy list, and go, I'll let them deal with it. I'm not going to deal with it. And I think that's going to be a more, a very important trait as we continue to be inundated. Hope that made sense. But thank you all very much for having me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Doug. And on behalf of the Terry College and its alumni board, I'd like to present this glass sculpture from a local artist, Paul Benzunas.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
And to all of you, remember, as you're leaving the parking deck, just tell them you were at Terry Third Thursday. That's your ticket out of here. I hope to see you next month.